Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a period of absolutely explosive change that really forged the America we know today.
So how does a country completely reinvent itself almost in the blink of an eye? Well, in the decades right after the Civil War, the United States didn't just get bigger. It was like three massive transformations were happening all at once.
First up, the cities. They just erupted, shooting skyward and pulling in millions of people from the countryside, all chasing the promise of a brand new life.
At the exact same time, the ports were swelling with wave after wave of immigrants, a flood of people like never before, all seeking freedom and a shot at a better life. And finally, out west, the vast frontier, something that had defined America for centuries, was settled, fenced in, and for all intents and purposes, closed for good.
Okay, so let's jump right into that first world, the chaotic, energetic, and just ridiculously fast-growing American city.
So get this. By 1900, cities like New York and Chicago had blown past 1 million residents. That is just staggering growth. A huge reason for this was new farm technology, like the mechanical reaper. All of a sudden, you didn't need as many people working the land, which pushed millions to pack up and head for the cities to find a job.
But the dream of the city and the reality of the city, they were often two very different things. People were drawn in by the promise of factory jobs and all these new opportunities, but what they often found was a life crammed into tiny, single-room tenement buildings, a lot of times with no heat or plumbing. The cities just couldn't keep up with the insane pace of growth.
So, stepping into this chaos, you get this really interesting phenomenon, the political machine. You've probably heard of Tammany Hall in New York, run by the infamous Boss Tweed. These guys provided stuff people desperately needed. Jobs, housing, a little help when you were down on your luck, but in exchange, they wanted your vote. Now, of course, they were also incredibly corrupt, using their power to get rich off the city. So they were part of the problem for sure, but for many new arrivals, they felt like the only solution.
Now, this urban explosion was happening at the exact same time a second massive transformation was underway, this one arriving on steamships. Let's take a look at how this unprecedented influx of immigrants completely changed the nation's culture.
So, why were so many people coming? Well, it really boils down to what historians call push and pull factors. People were literally being pushed out of their home countries by things like poverty or religious persecution. And at the same time, they were being pulled toward America by the promise of freedom, economic opportunity, and, letters from relatives already here saying, hey, life is better over here.
And here's where things get really interesting. After about 1880, the type of immigrant starts to change, big time. The old immigrants from places like Ireland and Germany were joined by this huge wave of new immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe. We're talking Italy, Poland, Russia. They brought different languages, different religions, and different cultures, which set the stage for this incredible diversity, but also a whole lot of social friction.
This new wave of immigration sparked a really powerful response, the Americanization movement. The whole idea was to create a melting pot, and public schools became a key tool, teaching kids English and American customs. But as you can tell from this quote by Theodore Roosevelt, it could be a pretty forceful process, basically demanding that people leave their old identities behind completely.
But not everyone was on board. This change also sparked a lot of fear and prejudice. A movement called nativism got really strong, with people arguing that these new immigrants were inferior and a threat to American jobs and culture. And this wasn't just talk. It led to actual policy, like the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, the very first time a federal law banned an entire group of people from coming into the country. A huge, huge deal.
All right, that brings us to our third and final world, the vast, untamed American West, which was about to undergo its own dramatic and permanent transformation.
The settlement of the West happened so fast because of this powerful three-part engine. First, the Transcontinental Railroad laid the tracks that made it possible for millions to even get out there. Then, the Homestead Act provided the incentive, 160 acres of free land. But all of this came at a terrible cost, which was realized through the tragic Indian Wars, where the U.S. military defeated Native American tribes to clear the way for settlement.
And it's so important to remember, this rush west wasn't into an empty land. It was a massive collision of cultures. You had miners chasing gold, ranchers driving cattle across the open range, and farmers using new tech like barbed wire to carve up the plains. And all of this clashed directly with the way of life of Native Americans, whose populations, along with the buffalo they depended on, were absolutely decimated.
You can really see how federal policy toward Native Americans shifted over time. First, you have the Dawes Act in 1887. Its goal was assimilation, trying to force them to be more like white settlers by breaking up tribal lands. But in reality, this policy just led to many Native Americans losing their land. It took decades for that approach to change, with the American Indian Citizenship Act of 1924 finally granting full U.S. citizenship without demanding they give up their tribal identity.
Okay, so what happens when these three massive worlds, the city, the immigrant, and the frontier, all collide with each other?
Well, you get a new America. In just a few short decades, the nation was fundamentally reshaped into the industrial, urban, and multicultural country we know today. But while the physical frontier was gone, new frontiers of conflict had opened up, creating deep social tensions and inequalities that, honestly, we are still dealing with.
The legacy of this transformation is literally all around us, in our cities, our cultures, and our laws. And it leaves you wondering about the true, lasting cost of that kind of rapid, revolutionary progress.